Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Our next speaker is Matthew Thuney. I only just had the opportunity to meet Matthew here in the last couple days, but we invited Matthew because, number one, he's just a regular person like all of us. You know, he's a man that has had enough interest in this phenomena to dig deep into a case called the Lummi Island incident. Are many of you familiar with it? Oh, a couple of hands. Yeah, for most of you, it looks like this might be pretty new stuff. Matthew, his background is, well, actually he went to divinity school. He did. Didn't quite make it, though. But he's a regular guy. You know, he has a wife and he has kids. And he just wants to get to some truth, you know. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to welcome Matthew Thuney, the Lummi Island incident.
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon. Can I get a good afternoon? Can I get a yes, we can? Senator Obama will be here in a few minutes. Thank you all for coming. This is a relatively new case that we'll be talking about. Well, it's an old case, but the evidence that I've been digging up is relatively new. It's an honor to follow Donald Schmidt. It's kind of an interesting segue as well, because what we're going to be talking about here is kind of a watery version of the Roswell incident, except no bodies that we know of. I'd like to begin with a few acknowledgments and then cut to the chase. First of all, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Seattle. I'm from Bellingham, Washington, up in the northwest corner of the Pacific Northwest, right up by the Canadian border. Yes. It's a wonderful place to be, and actually I think we're having better weather there than you folks have been having here, so that's unusual. But there's a little place in Seattle called the Seattle Museum of Mysteries, and the curators of that little place, a wonderful little place, are Charlotte LeFay and Philip Lipson. And they're the folks that basically got me involved in this, and I don't know whether to thank them for it or not. Quite frankly, you can be the judge of that. They got me interested in looking into this research. It's been over 20 years since the incident took place. A lot of the witnesses have disappeared, and there was a lot of digging to do into old archives and things of that nature. And I'm very thankful to my wife for the help there. What I couldn't find on the internet, my wife is a genealogist, and she actually still goes to libraries. It's quite an amazing thing. And she knows how to use the old microfiche machines, and I was digging through old archives and news reports and so forth, which proved of immense value. So I'd like to thank Donna. And mostly, apart from the folks who agreed to be interviewed very courageously, I thought, but actually most of them were quite willing to come forward. I would like to thank Doug Phillips. I don't know if many of you know him. He used to haunt some of these conferences. He himself was a longtime resident of Lummi Island, extraordinary jeweler, Fortean researcher, and just an all-around good guy with an incisive wit. Everyone loved him who met him, and he sadly passed away a couple of years ago. But he had a whole box that he found full of material, most notably the Coast Guard reports, which are sort of the cornerstone of this presentation. So I would like to thank Doug posthumously, and it's folks like him that make these things possible. You'll see me shuffling through my notes here. I'm one of the new faces that Bob mentioned earlier, so I'm a little bit nervous, a little old me from Bellingham with all these luminaries, so bear with me. I have been, for the past 20 years or so, the director of a group that was originally known as the Bellingham UFO Group. The acronym was BUFOG, and we thought, not so sure about that one. And as we started out looking into UFOs, and then we realized this is very similar to near-death experiences. And this is very similar to out-of-body experiences, what people are experiencing when they have these encounters, these contact experiences. So we changed our name from BUFOG to CONTACT, which is the Center for Ontological Action, which poses interesting problems of its own because nobody knows what the heck ontology is. But this is one thing I learned in college, in a philosophy class, that ontology is the study of being. And basically what we do with our contact group, we have monthly meetings up in the Pacific Northwest, and we do some little mini conferences. We're putting together one on human origins in a couple of months. And what we basically study is what it is to be human, and what it is, how are we evolving as human beings, hence the idea of action coupled with ontology. The energetic process of human consciousness, which is all a kind of highfalutin way to say that we're looking into who we are, where we came from, where we might be going, and how these strange and mysterious contact experiences and sightings that folks seem to have all the time relate to that. We believe that to be human is to change, to grow, to learn, to become. And I believe that we should really stop calling ourselves human beings and refer to ourselves as human becomings. Thank you. As I mentioned, the basic tenets of this report were presented at the behest of the Seattle Museum of Mysteries in 2005. It was kind of a slim report back then, and it keeps growing. And I happened to be at that conference in 2005. I followed in the footsteps of Lloyd Pye, whom I'm sure many of you are familiar with. He, in my book, is one of the primary researchers regarding hominids and their possible ties to our human origins as to what kind of stock we may have come from as human beings, where there was genetic manipulation involved, as is basically told in the Bible and all the texts, as we know. And I was rather overcome to be followed by, to follow such a learned person. And I realized that what we are doing, in addition to looking into human consciousness and who we are, where we've been, where we're going, is we are challenging mainstream science, because mainstream science won't go there. And I believe we're practicing what's called true science, which is rediscovering and redefining reality through both objective and imaginative examinations of evidence and experience. In other words, we are doing science. Those of us here at this conference, those of you in the audience, we are doing science. Mainstream science is basically defending a paradigm that is rapidly, I think, becoming indefensible. And I think we need to get together as a team. You know, there's a tendency among scientists, whether it's mainstream scientists or, as I say, true scientists who joust at the paradigm. There's a tendency, unfortunately, for us to get into our own turf wars. You know, we're defending this agenda, defending that agenda. That sometimes it comes out at these conferences, and I think it's very unfortunate. I think we need to stick together and realize that we have a greater purpose, and that is to bring these things out, to let people know that it's okay to study UFOs. It's okay to study near-death experiences. It's okay to study out-of-body experiences. It's okay to have these experiences and to share them. So that's what I think is the importance of true science and the spirit of inclusion. That is, let's tear down these barriers, let's stop these turf wars, and have an openness to all phenomena and possibilities. I think that's where we need to go. Thank you. Some of you may recognize this gentleman, Ivan T. Sanderson. For my money, he's one of the real true scientists, a very pioneer into true science. A very opinionated fellow, was a wonderful naturalist in Great Britain, served with British intelligence, and conducted groundbreaking research into UFOs and USOs, and Invisible Residence is one of his most important books, I think, where he discusses the possibility of underwater UFOs and brings forth a lot of evidence about that. I think we owe folks like Ivan Sanderson a huge debt of gratitude for standing up and making their thoughts known and bearing the slings and arrows of mainstream science and the debunkers and the denialists and all those folks. So let's get into the meat of the presentation here. I'd like to, I studied anthropology and a little bit of archaeology, and I like to, kind of set the site and setting. This is Lummi Island. Actually, my wife and I live just a few miles east of there on the mainland. Let's see if I can get this pointer to work. No. Well, the southern tip there is Carter Point, and basically the essence of Lummi Island is kind of a schizophrenic geological event that resulted in this whole thing. You see Lummi Peak to the north at the top of the slide, and that was the result of magma that flowed up from the Earth's crust. And then you have to the south kind of a subduction zone where there was a sliding of one plate over another. And it resulted in kind of a dead zone in the bay there, where there's not much going on in terms of vegetation and sea life. The fishing was mostly on the west side of the island and toward the north end. So we were looking at something in Eliza Island, which will come up in this discussion, is just off the southeastern tip of Lummi Island. So we're looking at an area that's not exactly terribly lively. And in fact, I don't think there are any residents on southern Lummi Island around Carter Point, and if there are any people at all living on Eliza Island, no one knows them. This is a kind of an artist's rendering telling about the history of Lummi Island. The Lummi people, the Native Americans who were indigenous to the region, first settled the island, and they had a thriving fishing industry, lots of trade going on, reef netting. And then around the 1770 to 1790 period, the first Spanish explorers came, and the first settlers came about the mid-19th century. And around 1900 was when the settlers began their own fishing program, as it were. They basically set up traps all around the island and caught all the salmon, destroyed the fishery, and there are actual photos of them. They caught so many fish, the settlers did, that they just basically tossed a lot of them away as waste. And ever since then, it's pretty much gone downhill for the Lummi people, unfortunately, until they started building casinos, which has boosted their economy immensely and sort of turned the tables on the white settlers, I think. So that's a little bit of the history of the island. And now let's get into the event itself. We're talking about the summer of 1984, and everyone like to have everyone kind of relax and kind of place yourself. Summer of 1984. I'm very relaxed because I'm not wearing a tie. My wife would say it's because I didn't remember to pack it, but that's not true. I deny those accusations. So, just going to relax, sit back. The summer of 1984, and this event occurred on July 27, 1984, in the middle of the night. That day was a particularly hot day in Bellingham. It was 80 degrees, which for us is hot. And in fact, there was a story on the cover of the Daily Bellingham Herald where someone tried to fry an egg on a sidewalk at 80 degrees. I don't think that worked. I don't think anybody ate eggs a la concrete that day, but It was a hot day. It was a clear day, and that's important. And this was back when there still was a bit of salmon fishing, still a bit of a salmon fishery in the Bellingham Bay, Puget Sound area. So even in the middle of the night, there happened to be some folks out in the bay fishing. So what follows is a recreation of the events that I put together, largely based on the Coast Guard reports, which we have copies of, and a little bit from the Bellingham Herald's reports, and it's even reached the national media. I think it was in the Globe or something like that at one point. So imagine yourself in the Pacific Northwest on a boat in the Puget Sound, about 3 o'clock in the morning, fishing, not much to do out there in the middle of the night, and then suddenly, out of a starry summer sky, at 3:39 a.m., the United States Coast Guard station in Bellingham, this is the local Coast Guard station, still there today, receives a call from a local fishing vessel reporting that, quote, a large flaming object throwing sparks landed in the water, creating a huge splash approximately 1,500 yards northwest of their fishing boat. The report is radioed in by the boat's captain, Richard Dale Hartman. He's the captain. The name of the fishing vessel is the Steva 10. And the position would place the splashdown just off of Carter Point that I showed you earlier, between Lummi and Eliza Islands. The object's color is reportedly white and orange, and its impact throws up a wall of water about 75 to 100 feet high. The surface of the bay where the object impacts continues to kind of roil and bubble for several minutes following the splashdown. 3:41 a.m., the Bellingham Coast Guard station receives another message. This is a sighting of the same object that recorded a little bit earlier, but there was apparently some argument aboard the boat that reported this sighting as to whether to call it in or not. But they received another message, and this call was radioed in from a tugboat called the Dolores, just off of Anacortes, which is about 5 miles south of Lummi Island. The crew of the Dolores reports seeing a sighting in the same direction as that witnessed by the folks on the Steva 10. The crew of the Dolores describes the sighting as somewhat like lightning, yet they also report that the skies are perfectly clear. "3:50 a.m. The folks on the Steva basically speed straight to that spot where the thing splashed down and searched the area and, quote, cited no debris, but it was still bubbling. Apparently, having monitored the Coast Guard calls at about this time, King 5 News, which is a major, I think they're an NBC affiliate in Seattle, calls the Coast Guard to find out some more information about the event. And at 4:28 a.m., and this was approximately a half hour later, upon further questioning, this is kind of a key point, the crew of the Steva 10 elaborates that the object appeared to drop straight down, then, before it hit the water, did a flip, a kind of a U-turn, and then entered the water. 4:37 a.m., at the request of U.S. Coast Guard Station in Seattle, this is the main Coast Guard station in the South Puget Sound, U.S. Air Force Space Command is asked to check for any orbital objects whose orbits might have decayed and might be coming down in the region, resulting in the splashdown. The response of Space Command is negative. Quote, we'll check on a few things and call you later, and I don't have any record of their ever having called back. They don't seem to have been terribly concerned, had nothing on their radar. 4:42 a.m., Richard Dale Hartman, the commander of the Steva 10 fishing vessel, is taken aboard a local Bellingham Coast Guard vessel and he ferries them to the scene and shows them where all this happened. 4:50 a.m., while they're en route to the scene, a third report is filed, and this isn't an actual photograph of that, but it's just actually, I think this sighting occurred a couple of years ago in Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. But at this time, a third report is filed directly from the Bellingham Coast Guard Station vessel with Captain Hartman aboard. And they say, quote, observed an object or light, white in color, moving across the sky from east to west this time, over the south end of Lummi Island. Elevation could not be determined as direction of the event was extremely brief. Intensity was slightly less than that of a parachute illumination flare. 5 minutes later, 4:55 a.m., Seattle Coast Guard, the main station, inquires of Whidbey Naval Air Station. Now, Whidbey Naval Air Station is a major naval air base kind of in the center of Puget Sound. And it's still active to this day. They are asked if they saw anything on the radar about 3:45 a.m. Whidbey Naval Air says, nope, we didn't see anything. We don't show anything coming down. And then in the days that followed, the FAA did their own examination into the incident, and obviously they found that there was nothing for them to be involved with, because there was some concern that it had been a plane crash, but it obviously wasn't. There was no debris and no report of any flights missing out of Bellingham or Seattle. 5:18 a.m., the Bellingham Coast Guard vessel completes its search of the splashdown area, and no object or debris has been found. Officer in charge, Rich Rogala, later tells the daily local paper, the Bellingham Herald, that there are no further plans to investigate, and Rogala estimates that the object sank in about 270 feet of water, which I think is a bit too much, as we'll see later. Now we're getting past dawn, and here we have a sample of one of the Coast Guard reports. There's, I don't know, 8 or 10 pages of this. I just wanted to show you a sample. U.S. Coast Guard Bellingham receives a call from the Whatcom County Department of Emergency Services, and basically the Department of Emergency Services for Whatcom County, which is Bellingham, Lummi Island, the whole northwest part of Washington state, is asked them to be taken out, and they want to check for radioactive traces as a result of this, and none were found. The Coast Guard kind of goes back and forth and surveys the Carter Point, the southern tip of Lummi Island, and says, nope, there's no signs of radioactivity. Now, from news accounts of July 27, we have the Seattle Coast Guard Chief Petty Officer, this is the guy from Seattle, Gene Hoff, describes the overall conclusion of the event as one involving an, quote, unidentified flying object. Officer in charge of the Bellingham Coast Guard Station, Rich Rogala, eventually concludes that it probably was a meteorite. It seems to me to be the logical explanation, he says. This gentleman is Dominic Papetti, a good old fisherman who supposedly retired from fishing about 10, 15 years ago. And when I called him for a follow-up interview just a few months ago, he was down in San Francisco fishing. So I guess fishermen never retire. So let's fast forward now to the winter of 1984-85. And in contrast to the sizzling summer of July of that year, the winter of right around Christmas time, New Year's, in 84-85 was extremely cold. We were just digging out of a snowstorm, and nobody was frying eggs on sidewalks. But although it was very cold, there were northeast winds coming through, and anytime there's a northeaster from Canada coming down the Fraser Valley, it's very clear. It blows out all the clouds, and again, we had absolutely clear conditions. As the northeasters calmed down, we had very calm seas. And near the end of the year, in the cold, crisp light of day, a boat and crew set forth to discover what had happened during that warm summer day in July. This is December 30, 1984. Took about 5 months of organizing and getting some funds together, and a crew, 2 divers, a gentleman named Sam Sudori from Emerald Marine Services out of Seattle, came up to Bellingham, recruited Dominic Papetti and his fishing vessel, a 58-foot fishing vessel, the Diane, and said, let's go out and find this thing. And they made no bones about it. They were in it for the money. They wanted to recover it, and they wanted to see what they got. And Dominic's daughter, Diane, the namesake of the boat, was also aboard. And so they headed out. They found roughly the spot where the Steve 10 had seen the object 5 months before and said it went down. They cruise around for a while, didn't find anything. Then they make a second pass, and on the second pass, they locate something on the Diane's depth finder and sonar, and it's Dominic described it as an object about 10 feet high and 30 feet wide, and it appeared to be wedged into the bottom of the bay, which at that point is very flat. And Dominic, during this interview, I interviewed him in the parking lot of the Bellingham Marina, and he ran his foot along the asphalt, and he said, it's just like that. It's just flat out there. But there was a slight depression, and apparently the object was wedged in at about a 45-degree angle. The object, he says, was embedded in a small depression, as I mentioned, and during the ensuing retrieval attempt with the 2 divers, Dominic said he noticed a couple of airplanes flying overhead that were unmarked, and the airplanes had no contact, no radio contact with the boat below, so he kind of wondered what's going on with these folks. So then the diving effort begun, and now, ladies and gentlemen, you are about to see a real, actual photograph of the divers and the UFO. Okay, it's not an actual photograph. It's actually a rather fanciful artist's rendition of what they might have seen. It's not terribly accurate from what I can tell, but it did accompany a really wonderful article that was written regarding this whole event in the Western Washington University magazine. Western Washington University is a big university in Bellingham, and the magazine's called The Clip Sun, and they came out with an article on it, and I got a lot of information from that, but this was their rendition. There are 2 divers. The first fellow, John Walker, he dove down first, and he reports seeing a metallic gold-colored object shaped like a satellite dish. Now, this was 1984. They were huge. You know, remember in 1984, satellite dishes weren't the little teeny things that you put on the side of your wall. They're these huge things. He also described seeing a kind of a lip around the edge of it and a clasp on one end, which is kind of odd. And the next day, Walker, who was quite a talker apparently, told the Bellingham Herald, quote, "It's not a boat and it's not a plane, it's not rock and it's not wood." Well, how does he know that? Apparently, according to Diane, aboard the Diane, he took his diver's knife and wrapped it against the side of the thing. And he said he reported it felt metallic and it looked kind of bronzish in color. And then Richard Burke, the second diver, dove. These are both, according to both Dominic and Diane, were both professional divers. They'd done a lot of salvage work, that kind of thing. They appeared to have been militarily trained and possibly Navy SEALs. We're not sure about that. I haven't been able to locate these folks, so I'm working on that. So Richard Burke dives next, and he actually stood on the object. And he reports it as being kind of like an upside-down teacup. And he describes an oval-shaped hatch or cavity. And an odd thing that he reported about is that there's no sea growth on the object whatsoever, which if it's been at the bottom of the bay for 5 months, you would think there would have been some accumulation of some kind of sea growth, but there was nothing on it. And he took down with him an underwater video camera. And Diane recalls being on the boat and watching the images as they came up, and she said, yeah, it looked like pretty much a classic flying saucer wedged into the bay there. But as he starts taping, after a couple of minutes, the video camera burned, no, the spotlight for the video camera burned out. But he tried to keep taping. And as he was standing on the object, Burke got a little bit excited and he exclaimed, "Woo-wee, I'm standing on a UFO!" And he claimed to feel it or hear it. I think he felt it through his boots, humming, vibrating, something like that. And Diane mentioned aboard the boat that they could feel it too, and they thought maybe it was, a miscellaneous engine noise from a boat in the vicinity that they were picking up, but there was nobody else out there in a frigid winter's day, so that's unlikely. And Burke comes up so quickly from his dive, and this guy's a seasoned professional diver, that he got a pretty good case of the bends, and he was bleeding from the nose and mouth when he came up. And so as they are attending to him after his dive, they notice that there's a kind of red dirt or film on his boots that apparently he picked up while he was standing on the object. It wouldn't have been indigenous to Bellingham Bay, certainly. And they scraped off a sample of that, which was sent to the University of Washington, and we have not been able to discover what the results of those tests were. So we're still trying to find out about that. I have talked to another UFO researcher who says he has a sample of that very substance, but he has not sent it to me, so I'm waiting on that too. A lot of things in the wind here. So the group decides, well, we better go back to shore and attend to Burke's welfare, since he obviously has a case of the bends. And so they do that and go back to Bellingham Harbor. At that point, apparently sometime that evening, John Walker got into a rather heated argument with the rest of the crew. Walker is described as kind of a belligerent, blowhard type guy, and I think he wanted to blow the cover off this thing, and Diane felt that he was almost a saboteur, as it were, that he just wanted to disrupt the whole mission from start to finish. Anyhow, he's kicked off the team. So they decide to bring up another diver from Emerald Marine Services. This fellow's name is J.R. Hoyrip. And he says, yes, I'll come up tomorrow morning, drive up from Seattle. Now, according to a letter from Don Johnson, who was then the Washington State Director of MUFON, I'm sure you folks are familiar with MUFON, Richard Burke, the other diver who stayed with the mission, agreed to take a polygraph test and tell what he saw. And I have the very letter here. It's showing up on the screen. I've tried to contact Don and ask him what was the result, was the test ever taken, and I haven't heard back on that either. So we're waiting on that one. But it's interesting that he had agreed to take a polygraph. And that's pretty much where the tale may have ended if not for this fellow, Harry Watkinson. Who is Harry Watkinson? Well, he's a great guy for one thing. He's very forthcoming. He was a pilot for now defunct San Juan Airlines. And San Juan Airlines is basically a kind of puddle jumping commuter airline that flew from Bellingham to Seattle, all over the Puget Sound, Port Townsend, Port Angeles, and back again, and he would do regular runs over the Puget Sound. And this is a photo taken from one of the many synchronicities is that I seem to get these photos that are taken right at the time these things happened. This is a photo of Harry with his Cessna 402 that was taken in 1984 when this all happened. And as fate would have it, Harry happened to fly over Puget Sound the day of December 31st, 1984. And he flew a number of puddle jumping runs that day. And his memories of what he saw on those flights are extremely vivid, and they stand out in his mind to this day because of their peculiarity. Who is Harry Watkinson? Well, he served on this vessel. This is the Oriskany. It was an aircraft carrier that was deployed during the Vietnam War Harry served in the tower, directing pilots in their landing on the deck of the Oriskany. And he retired from the Navy some years later, continued to fly for San Juan Airlines, and now that San Juan Airlines is no longer around, he basically flies charters to eastern Washington and around the Sound, local flights. He's logged over 17,000 hours in the air, and he continues to fly. He's kind of a hard guy to get a hold of and interview because he's always on the run. But the point being here is that Harry Watkinson is a trained observer. He knows what he sees when he sees it. On the morning of December 31, now this would be the morning after the Diane vessel made its first attempt to go out there, and they had to go back because the diver got the bends, and they had the argument that following night. At dawn the next day, Harry began his flights over the Puget Sound. His first one from Bellingham to, I think, Seattle. And he noticed, and another one of these synchronicities, this plane is a Cessna 402. This is actually a postcard that San Juan Airlines put out at the time. And it's actually flying right over the area where all this took place in the same year. There's Lummi Island and Eliza Island is in the foreground there. Now, I'm going to show you a series of photos that he took at about 1,200 feet just a few weeks ago. He generally flies around 2,000 to 3,000 feet when he's coming into and out of Bellingham. But here we're looking east toward Mount Baker. And you can see, well, you can't really see Bellingham in between, but we're there. So he said it was around dawn on December 31st. I'm thinking it's probably 7:30 a.m. based on sunrise at that time of the year. And as dawn is breaking, Harry Watkinson begins his daily runs. It was a perfectly clear morning, not like these photos here, which was kind of a cloudy winter day. But back then it was perfectly clear. And he notices something strange as he flies over the bay. That something strange is that there are 3 ships painted navy gray, one large vessel accompanied by 2 smaller vessels. He said the 2 smaller vessels were about a third the size of the larger vessel. And they seem to be, accompanying each other, steaming up through the Puget Sound, which is kind of an odd thing. Now, he said he had seen similar vessels stationed at Keyport Naval Undersea Warfare Base, long name. Now I think it's just Naval Base Kitsap in the southern Puget Sound, where a lot of the nuclear subs are kept and are maintained. Now he's on a return flight, and he watches as this trio of ships turns eastward around Sinclair Island, heading toward Bellingham or Lummi and Eliza Islands. And now he's beginning to think this is very strange. You very rarely see, if ever, see naval vessels in this area, whether it's on a training mission or otherwise. And now he's flying back and forth still. On a subsequent return trip, that morning from Bellingham, Harry notes that the 3 ships have headed into Bellingham Bay. Now, he notices at this point that the large vessel kind of parks, basically, probably anchored for a while. And the 2 other vessels are proceeding, one is proceeding east to west, the other north to south, like they're in a grid pattern, like they're searching for something perhaps. And so his curiosity is really piqued, and this is why he remembers all this so vividly. He thought, this is very strange, you just don't see this in little old Bellingham Bay with Navy ships performing a search pattern. Oh, and I should go back to that. He pointed this out. A friend of mine, Dave Bach, who helped immensely in this interview process, is a little bit of a warfare nut. And he had a book dating from almost this exact period. I think it's 1982, 83. And Harry pointed to this, and he said, well, the smaller ships were about that size, kind of patrol boat size or minesweeper size, a little bit bigger. And the interesting thing is that this boat was built in Bellingham, Washington back in the day, so a little bit of a coincidence there. Now, Harry tried to describe to us what he saw of the large vessel. And as the morning light brightened and it got toward noon, he could see the boats better. He noticed that there was a structure, kind of a projection, off the bow of the big vessel, sort of like you've probably seen the cable layers that lay the cable across the ocean floor in the Atlantic and Pacific. And he thought that was strange too. Why would a boat like that be out there? And he, like I said, he served aboard an aircraft carrier during the Vietnam War, and he was generally intrigued. This was looking more and more like a search mission. The big question mark. Early afternoon, approximately noon to 3 p.m., I'm guessing, is when the Diane set forth again to reconnoiter the object and hopefully try and bring it up. Now, Harry, on his final run of the day, around noon, said he saw the ships, the three naval ships, departing and heading back southward toward possibly Keyport Naval Base. So around noon, remember it took time for the new diver to come up from Seattle, and they had to refit the boat, get the new tanks on and everything. Around that time, the second voyage of the Diane took place, and they approached the search area. As they approached the search area, they notice, Diane remembers seeing off in the distance some ships sailing away, and they looked, it was rather odd to have these ships sailing away, and she said one of them was pretty big, and she described it as a bow picker, which for fishing folks, a bow picker is a fishing boat with something off the front end, usually a crane of some sort where they lay the net and reel the fish in, which is amazingly congruent with what Harry described as the larger vessel. And these were kind of sailing away as the Diane approached that day. So the crew of the Diane settles in. They found the same spot where they had been before. And now they're pretty excited. They're ready to dive on this thing again and maybe tow it or bring it up somehow if they can. So they park over the search zone, and they don't seem to find anything. So they decide to haul anchor, and they go all around there. Maybe it moved or something in the tides or whatever. It's unlikely. But they eventually find absolutely nothing there. And so Burke and Hoyrup, the two divers, are sent down to reconnoiter. Maybe the depth finder isn't working. Maybe the sonar is not working. They dive all around the area, and the object appears to have completely vanished. So, to recap, what do we really know about all this? Well, we know that in the early morning hours of July 27, a large object trailing fire and spewing sparks splashed down approximately 1,500 yards off of Lummi Island. We know that there was a retrieval attempt and that these people located something at that location. Both divers claimed to have observed the object. One even stood on it, and one banged on it with his knife. And there were subsequent reports. I spoke with Bill Cummins, who's a longtime Lummi Island resident, entrepreneur, and he was very curious about this whole series of events. So he went in early 1985. He basically went around in January, early January, went around to the marinas, the harbors, and talked to the fishermen, mechanics, folks that happened to be there around this time. And he said, well, did you see anything strange? You know, was there anything going on? And they happened to mention, and they were all pretty much congruent on this point, that the night between when the Diane made its first voyage and when the mysterious Navy vessels came into the area and left, there was a mysterious ship in the middle of the night, a large vessel, and they all described it as a NOAA vessel, a National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration vessel. Well, how did they know that's what it was? Well, these are fishermen. Now, unlike Navy vessels, there are NOAA vessels that occasionally come into our bay. They are mapping the seafloor, things of that nature. And in fact, there's an effort by our local Chamber of Commerce in the Port of Bellingham to berth one or two NOAA vessels permanently in Bellingham. So they are seen in the bay. And folks said, yep, it was a NOAA vessel. We saw the lights. Their hulls are painted white, easy to see even at night. And it apparently came up from the south, parked in the target area, stayed there for a while, and then headed back south. Now, one wonders if this was a sort of a reconnaissance mission prior to the 3 Navy ships that came the next day. So what are the possible explanations for this mystery? Meteorological, was it lightning like it was described as? Apparently not. The skies were perfectly clear, no storms, no nothing. Perhaps it was a meteorite, or is there an astronomical explanation? I have searched the archives as best I can. I found no evidence of any particular meteor shower that day or any other sightings of meteors. And these objects, remember there were 2 sightings, went in opposite directions, which would be unusual. So I think it's unlikely that it can be explained by that. Plane crash? No, there was no debris, no planes missing. Was it a hoax? A lot of folks thought it's just a hoax. You know, these people are just talking through their hats. Well, if it was a hoax, it was a damn poor one, because nobody made any money off this thing. There were no tell-all books or fabricated reports. No evidence, brought forward that would be sensationalized. So, if it was a hoax, they didn't do a very good job. And in fact, everyone that I've talked to who was involved in this incident remains just absolutely puzzled. What happened? Where did this thing go? They want to find out. And Dominic Papetti, whenever he sets sail in the Puget Sound area, he says, I'm still drawn to that area. I always sort of, find myself going over there and looking around and seeing if there's anything happening there. So unlikely that it was a hoax. Was it space junk? Now, I found that there was an actual launch of a Soviet satellite, which a similar one is depicted here. It's of the Zenit series. And it may have malfunctioned. It wouldn't have come exactly across that part of the sky. And it looks a little bit like, what John Walker described. However, these things aren't very big. And it would have probably been burnt up and scorched during reentry, and it would not reach the 30-foot size that the crew of the Diane reported. So it's very unlikely that that is a logical explanation. What about a UFO? And here you can kind of see a UFO in somebody's fish tank. It would seem that the original sighting and the subsequent locating of the object can't be explained by conventional means. Why did the object, following its headlong descent, suddenly make a strange maneuver? Was this intelligently controlled? Why did it continue to bubble and roil the water for several minutes after it went down? Was it venting something? As I mentioned, when the humming, the vibrating, after 5 months being wedged into the bay, you'd think is probably be pretty still by then, and yet it appeared to be almost alive with energy. As I mentioned, Dominic is still flummoxed by the entire affair. He says, quote, maybe something came out of the sky that wasn't supposed to. Now, one wonders, are there any other possible explanations for this? Which brings us back to Ivan Sanderson and true science. What would Ivan do? But let's look at the empirical evidence real quick. This object picked a great place to land. It would be unlikely to be discovered. It landed in the middle of the night when there are probably not many people around. It chose a spot where there was not much sea life, not much vegetation. Nobody fishes there. It's not going to get caught in somebody's net. You know, it's almost as if you were going to land a UFO and keep it underwater for whatever reason, monitoring purposes, whatever. That'd be a good spot, and that'd be a good time to do it. Unfortunately, some humans saw you and found you. Might we conclude, or at least theorize, the impossible, that this object was intelligently controlled? Perhaps the military did retrieve it, or maybe, just maybe, it didn't want to be found and left on its own accord. So should we consider Dominic Papetti's conclusion? The object, he says, the divers, everything just disappeared, and that was the end of the journey, he told me. But perhaps it might just be beginning. So, I would cordially invite you, kind folk, true scientists all, I'm sure, to join me on this journey. If you've heard anything, if you know of any leads to follow in the story, please let me know. I'm still interested and still researching it. If you have any questions, let me know. My wife is manning a table in the back where we have our contact group email list. If you'd like to join us on that for discussions and events and things of that nature, we'd be happy to have you. I have a couple of books for sale. Here's the advertisement, paid advertisement. One is about the Lummi Island incident, and the other is about my own experiences. As you may have guessed, I have had some interesting contact experiences myself, and I've been trying to sort those out for the past several years. They've been life-changing and quite challenging to discover what it means. As we sell those books, the proceeds will go toward the purchase of a tie. I think we have about 5 minutes left. I would like to entertain questions if anybody would like to come forward. Do we have a mic over here? I think we do. Is it on? Not on? Is there a switch there? No, maybe not. Yeah. The only explanation I've heard from the crew was that he was excited. You know, he had stood on this object that obviously was different from anything he had ever seen before, and he was extremely excited, and he just forgot everything went out of his mind. You know, he just went straight up instead of stopping to decompress. What happened to the video that they made? I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. They did examine the video when they came back that afternoon, and they were seeing to Burke's welfare, and they looked at it, and it was completely blank. I think I see somebody there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, I will. Thank you very much. This gentleman was pointing out some Native American contacts at Whidbey Island. And also there's, I think part of the Lane clan lives in the Lummi Nation. And I do know a few of them, and I haven't had a chance to interview them yet, so maybe I can get connected there. Thank you for that suggestion. Yes?
What was the depth of the water at the crash site?
Oh, I forgot to mention that too. This is all in the book, by the way. It varies. There are varying reports. I mentioned that Rich Regala, the Coast Guard fellow, said it was about 270 feet. I think that's about at least 50 feet too deep. As best as I can.
200 feet deep?
Yeah, I think it was around 200. Yeah.
Oh, and also that ship
Yes, it is an LSD. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Dr. Dick French, PhD. I'm interested. Labrador some time ago. Have you?
I have not compared the two. He was mentioning about the Goose Bay laboratory incident that has a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And there's one actually in the South Puget Sound, the Maury Island incident, that has some similarities too. There are a lot of these reports of UFOs coming out of the water.
Well, what I found unique about the one at Goose Bay, Labrador, was the fact that one went in, and then fairly soon another one came in. The two joined. They were down there together. Pretty soon one comes back out, but it lasted over a period of 2 days, and apparently was going to some support vehicle, coming back, like going out for spare parts or something.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating stuff. And
Yeah.
the Navy has reported a lot of these things. I can see I'm out of time, but I'll just close with this. The Navy has reported a lot of these things. Harry Watkinson, the pilot that I mentioned, mentions an incident where an object landed just off the fantail of one of these aircraft carriers. I don't think it was the Oriskany. I can't remember which one it was. And subsequently came out of the water, and a whole bunch of people on deck saw it. But of course, it didn't quite make the news media. I guess okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.